Morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to No Food Live. I'm your host, Courtney Riggle, joined by my co-host, Matthew Lang. And we're very pleased to welcome you to season 2, episode 7 of the No Food series. Our show today, No Food Wasted, characterizing food waste data streams and identifying opportunities to reduce food waste. For those who are new to our series, No Food is here to dive deep into the world of food informatics and the Internet of Food. We interview scientists, business people, thought leader, all kinds of innovators to foster collaboration and advance global food digitization and democratization efforts. No Food Live airs the third Thursday every month, but you don't have to remember that. Just click down below and register, and you'll never miss an episode.
Ciao tutti. We are so pleased to have you join us on No Food Live today. I hope I'm coming through loud and clear. I am broadcasting from Italy, so my signal may be slightly delayed. Whatever day you may end up watching this, we hope you enjoy the show. Our previous episodes are all available for streaming in case you missed it on the No Food channel. And we thank you so much for tuning in. Several of you have sent in ideas, and we are working on them for new shows. And if you have additional ideas, you can email us at KnowFOOD, that's KNOW food, at ic-foods.org, or you could just click on the link in the video description.
So today, No Food will explore how we can use technology to better understand the sources of food loss and waste and the interventions that will prevent them and potential for upscaling specific food components. Our guests will help us learn about what sorts of cyber infrastructures and socio-technical systems could best enable the circular economy of food. So what data do we need, and how might we best facilitate that interoperability that we really need?
So we open our conversation today with Dana Gunders, Executive Director of refed.org, a nonprofit whose mission, one of whose missions, is to cut food loss and waste in half by 2030. Dana will walk us through current food waste characterization and metrics, and what's needed to advance food waste interventions, and give us a feel for the return on investment for their corporate partners. Welcome, Dana.
Welcome, Dana.
Thank you.
Second up today, give us a little wave. We're very pleased to welcome Brian Rowe, Director of the Food Waste Collaborative at The Ohio State University and data group leader for a new $15 million NSF project called Recipes for Sustainable Food Systems, which stands for Resilient, Equitable, and Circular Innovations with Partnerships and Education Synergies. So exciting, long. I'm glad that you have Recipes. That's a great acronym. And Brian is going to discuss some of these new efforts and the process to develop ontologies and data systems around food loss and waste in some of the interventions. So welcome, Brian.
And rounding out our discussion today, we'll be joined by Associate Professor Ned Spang from UC Davis, who also leads measurement and characterization projects for the University of California Food Loss and Waste Collaborative. Ned will walk us through current research project use cases around loss and waste quantification, highlighting the ways in which improvements hold promise to better understand economic and environmental impacts of our food sheds. Welcome, Ned.
Yeah, welcome everyone. So let's get started. As we mentioned, first up today will be Dana Gunders. Dana, it's such a pleasure to have you join us on No Food today. And I've seen lots of press about some of the different initiatives you've been involved in the recent past. And before we get into what's currently happening at ReFed, can you tell us a little bit more about what the waste-free movement is and some of your previous work with the National Resources Defense Council and some of the other things you've been involved with? Just briefly, because I know you have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, sure. Well, I got into this whole issue of how much food goes to waste and trying to reduce it about 10 years ago when I was working at the Natural Resources Defense Council, and wound up publishing a paper on it that sort of in some ways broke the news on that there's about 40% of food going to waste. So yeah, I've been working on it ever since. I've done things like start an ad campaign with the Ad Council called Save the Food. I wrote a book called The Waste Free Kitchen Handbook. I was involved in a cities project that lives on today at Natural Resources Defense Council called the Food Matters Project that actually has about 16 cities working together or kind of it is a part of a network to reduce waste.
Great.Well, I'll let you jump into your prepared presentation and quickly to our live stream audience, type your questions into the YouTube comments and we'll be able to respond to those live during the show. So take it away, Dana.
Thank you. Well, I thought I would start out and kind of bear with me on the screen sharing here a little bit. Just by letting you know who we are at ReFed. We are a national nonprofit that is focused domestically in the US, and we focus on ending food loss and waste here entirely. So we're entirely dedicated to that problem. And we really do it through three main pillars. One is focusing on data and insights, which I'll talk more about today. The second is trying to bring more capital into the space, both private investment and philanthropic, and kind of matching that with innovation. So we're tracking a lot of the innovation that's going on as well. And then third, by really acting as a hub and connector in the space. So we host a network of over 700 practitioners in this space. We welcome anyone to join, as well as an annual summit, which we just had last week in Minneapolis, which was incredible, and other types of programming to sort of keep everyone up to speed and bring the latest and greatest to those interested. So that's a little bit about who we are. I'm going to actually switch my screen over because one of our biggest initiatives is around data. And we really focus our delivery of that data. And I know since we're talking about data today, I wanted to give you a little peek at our ReFed Insights engine. We launched this about 1 year ago. And it is a set of tools to really learn more about the amount of food going to waste and what we can do about it. And so to introduce you to the topic, I thought I would do it by just sort of poking around on the insights and to give you a sense. So in the US, we estimate that there are about 35% of food goes uneaten, and we call that food surplus. And it goes to a bunch of places. It goes to landfill, it goes to composting, it goes to animal feed. It is happening all around the food system. So, the largest chunk is actually coming from us in our homes. But as well, quite a bit of food goes unharvested at farms. And you can see pretty significant, amounts by food service, manufacturing, and retail as well. Just to give you a peek at this tool, you can kind of poke in and go into any particular sector. So, if we sort of jump into residential, for instance, you can kind of see more specifically. And then you can also look at why it's happening. And that's something that we really introduced as part of this tool is in order to solve this problem, you really need to kind of understand, the main causes and how much is happening for different reasons. I like to say, people talk about food waste as if it's one problem, but in fact, it is kind of like fixing the whole food system. And it's very different if you're talking about tomatoes on farm or spoiled food in the home. So really understand how much is happening for what reason and where is key to solving it. Just one other thing you can do on this part of the tool is actually look at it through different metrics. So you can see it in a dollar value, surplus tons, the greenhouse gas tons, and it kind of, the information, of course, shifts depending on what you're looking at. Lastly, I'll highlight we have a data quality score here, which, since this discussion is about data, this, as a data geek myself, was a really important unlock for us because there's such poor information on this topic. We wanted to be able to share everything that's out there, even if it's not a peer-reviewed academic study, even if it's not, nationally representative. And so depending on where we're getting the information, we kind of rank ourselves on the data quality. So this is our food waste monitor. It tells you how much is going to waste, but we also analyzed about 42 different solutions to food waste. we grouped those into 7 categories, which you can see up here. Because when you sort of zoom out, you can see that the main solutions to this problem really, they kind of group into some of these categories, right? Basically, we need to optimize the harvest. We need to grow the right amount and then get everything off the field. We need to enhance product distribution, meaning just not lose it as it's traveling around the country and the world and being stored. We need to refine product management, meaning we need to match what we are buying with what actually sells, which can be a really difficult equation if you're an enormous business. Or even a small business that's just facing the ups and downs of COVID demand or things like that. We need to use all of the product. So let's not just use the tops of the broccolis, let's use the stalks. We need to really take a look at that household and what is happening with consumers, because as you saw, they are the biggest chunk of the problem. And then, once we've sort of done our best to prevent all of the food that's going to waste, we need to look at how do we improve our ability to rescue that food that maybe is surplus before it goes to waste and get it to those in need. And when none of that works, recycle anything remaining. So those are our categories. You can come on this tool and you can view the 42 solutions down here, depending on what you care about. If you care about greenhouse gases, you can click on climate. If you just want to, maybe you have a goal that's related to the tons of food going to waste, you can do that. And you can pop on in and learn about any of the solutions a little bit more through our fact sheets. One of the key things we've also done is look at where the investment for each type of solution would need to come from. And we actually have 9 different categories of capital that we look at. If you want to get in touch with anyone, you can find over 1,000 organizations now in our solution provider directory. This is both nonprofit and for-profit groups that are working on the issue. If you want to calculate the impact of your food waste or of a potential change that you're looking to make, you can come on to our impact calculator and kind of tell us what stage of the supply chain, what food you have, and what you're looking at. Let's just say it's going to landfill. You can type it in and it will give you instantly your footprint in a couple of different metrics. Our newest tool is our capital tracker, where we're actually looking at the investment that's coming into the space, just private investment right now, but we'll be adding philanthropic and government funding eventually. And then we also have a policy finder tool that you can look in and kind of look at different policies around the country, depending on what you're interested in. So I know I don't have a ton of time, but just wanted to sort of introduce the topic in that way. It's a solvable problem. There is a ton that we can do to solve it. I will say on the data side, it has been challenging. One of the things we had to do is to look at over 50 data sets in order to create some of those pictures that you were seeing, and use academic studies and case studies and industry papers and just a lot of phone calls to people to say, hey, do you have any, have you tried this? How well does your solution work? Does this number sound about right to you? So we're really in the early stages of wrapping our hands around how do we come up with standard ways to measure this, that are doable by businesses, that are not super expensive, and not just businesses, but cities and local governments that are really interested in measuring and understanding. Because when you measure it on the back end in the waste bin, you don't get all of the information, and digging through waste bins is impractical. So there's a whole set of complexities just to figuring out about how much food goes to waste, that we can get into if you'd like. And with that, sorry, these were all to show you the information if I wasn't able to share that. But I will just close with sort of our main analysis of those 42 solutions. What we have found is that there are national and international goals to reduce the amount of food we waste by 50% by 2030. That's right around the corner in 8 short years, not even. And so we really looked at, is that possible? And what we found is it is. It is possible if you include things like composting and anaerobic digestion as part of the solution. We found it's possible, but it will take about $14 billion in investment to achieve that. That investment would have a return of about $73 billion. And so, a net gain to society in terms of the economics. And also, it would save 4 trillion gallons of water, 75 million tons of greenhouse gases. That's about the equivalent of 16 million cars, and 4 billion meals. It would create 4 billion meals for people in need and create 51,000 jobs. Most of those jobs would be created through the recycling sector, things like composting and anaerobic digestion. The only catch to this is that we would need 100% participation by all businesses, by all of us across the country, which of course is an enormous bar to reach. So bottom line, we need everyone to participate, and we hope you will all join us. Thank you.
Awesome. Can you hear me? No, fine.
Yeah.
Hello. Yeah. Okay, good. It's my lag again there. Okay. Sorry about the lag coming all the way across the Atlantic, Dana. So, wow, very compelling numbers. You mentioned that there are international efforts, but it seems like your efforts are more based domestically in the United States. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. We certainly try to collaborate here and there and learn from what's happening internationally and share our learnings, but there's enough of a problem to take on here in the US that we've decided it's really important for us to kind of focus here.
And if I could just follow up on that $73 billion number, because that's a big number. How do you see that $73 billion return on investment? Who's that going to benefit? Is that going to go to Elon Musk? Is that going to be spread around to lots of people participating? Where do you see that kind of money going?
Yeah, fair question. It really depends on the solutions we're looking at, right? A lot of that is really going into consumers' pockets, because we won't crack this problem if consumers don't reduce their waste, and when they reduce their waste, they save that money, right? So a lot of it is going back into consumers' pockets. There are a number of solutions that do save businesses money. That's fundamentally, if you waste less food, you save money if it's in your own domain, whether that's your home or your business. And so all of the solutions that prevent food from going to waste typically save money to those that are preventing it. So there's a great business case to be made for this. A group called Champions 12.3 looked at the business case. Their estimate is that there's a 14-to-1 return for businesses to invest in this. Of course, when you get down to the details, it really depends on what they're doing. It might be 5-to-1, it might be 2-to-1, but typically when businesses are forecasting more precisely, and so they're buying much closer to their actual demand, or they're investing and losing less in distribution, that saves money.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. That was really fantastic. Now let's shift to our next guest, Professor Brian Rowe. Brian, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Did you hear Matthew?
Yep, I can hear you. That is fantastic. So, Brian, you are the director of the Food Waste Collaborative at The Ohio State University, and you also lead this data group for the $15 million NSF Recipes project that Courtney mentioned earlier. And full disclosure to our audience, myself, IC Foods, is participating with you in doing a review on the ontologies behind food waste, which is a very interesting project for us. So I'm super excited to learn more, not just about that, but about recipes and what you, of course, seek to accomplish with the data and the data. um, sort of like that real estate location, except it's data. At least as far in my world, I'm guessing you feel somewhat the same way. Uh, so uh, I don't know if your presentation is about the recipe project as a whole, but if it's not, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about it before you kick off with your slides.
Yeah, my slides kick off with some overview of the recipes. So we can go to those
Great.
if that is helpful. Great.
Then I'll just step back and leave you to it.
Great. Can you see the slides? Is it okay? All right. So the Multi-Scale Recipes Group is a regional sustainable systems network grant that was funded by the National Science Foundation, 5 years for $15 million. And again, here we're focusing on the food system with those keywords, resilience, equity, and circularity being those first three initials of recipes. We come to a food system that's typically shown to us as being linear, starting with farming, moving through to the consumption stage, with waste occurring at each step. And we've come to appreciate this hierarchy of waste reduction and then trying to repurpose waste, etc. But what the network is doing is really trying to re-envision us from transforming wastes into kind of transforming systems. And the vision here is to kind of create generalizable knowledge. Again, really focusing in on regional systems and through the lens of sustainability, equity, and resilience by minimizing and transforming anything that is lost or wasted. And here we really emphasize convergence, that is working across disciplines to forge new ways of thinking that really blends together multiple disciplinary visions. And to do that also, obviously, you need inclusion of multiple viewpoints, not only within the academy, but outside of the academy, and then also to then be able to share that out through education. And we hope this will transform this kind of linear vision of systems into a transformed regional system that is much more circular, where these loops are extended and slowed and then closed so that we do have the circularity for the benefit of all. Now, the group is distributed across the country. I think there's about 40 different researchers that are funded as part of the initial grant, many new initiatives that are branching out from the group already as we're less than a year into our network. And you can see we've got locations there in Davis, California, including Ned, who's also on the call today, in the Northeast, East, South, and in the Midwest with many different institutions and many different regions of study where these transformations might be envisioned happening. We also, to be able to have convergence, we really need to connect with those people being affected by these issues. And we're very proud to partner with a number of organizations on this page, including ReFed from Dana's group. And they're a critical partner as we think critically about the data aspect of the network. And one of our key clusters is our data cluster, because as Dana mentioned, there are many challenges in the data space surrounding wasted food and lost food. And so we have strong aspirations basically to bring the data environment for wasted food on par with that of energy or water. Right now, despite ReFed's best efforts, and those are beautiful, that's a beautiful data set that they pulled together. But as we noticed, they're also very cognizant of quality and are rating quality. And many of those quality ratings are on the lower end of that spectrum. And so we really aspire to be able to bring that to be high quality on all those data sets and to fill in gaps as they exist. And so one way we're hoping to address that through the network is to shape data interoperability by building out a wasted food ontology. And as you mentioned, Matthew, part of that is to begin very slowly with a scoping review article that both people in the network and some of our partners, new partners from outside the network, including yourself and others at IC Foods, to develop a scoping review in this space so we understand all the possible ontologies that might inform a wasted food ontology. And then as that's completed, to bring together more stakeholders to do a mapping project for ontology, so we can have that data backbone that can really open up interoperability. Of course, we also want to generate just additional data on wasted food. We are standing up and have set up the beginnings of a national tracking survey for household food waste, which is often very difficult data to obtain. We're also working with some partners to use household purchase data from scanner data to try to develop annual household waste estimates going back a decade or two, using some of that data, using some data techniques. And we're also working hard to develop scalable methods to estimate the types and quantities of food from images, so that this can be wielded not only for wasted food, but perhaps for the entire food ecosystem, so that these can be easily obtained and mapped into databases. And then, of course, we'd love to be able to integrate, store, share, and visualize data in support of these goals. And again, here we're working closely with Recite and that, or InFed, with that beautiful insights engine that Dana gave an overview of, and trying to work with them carefully to make sure that we're contributing to them in terms of being able to provide an even stronger product. Our overall vision for this data infrastructure here is pitched in this schematic, where we visualize decision makers being able to use this all the way from the consumer down to the grower and the farmer, where the data architecture will support being able to analyze solutions, as well as being able to embed some of the key policy, governance, and system status elements that impact all of these. And then we'd love to be able to have granularity, as ReFed does in theirs, to be able to go from national down to regional, community, and even to the household level, all in support of being able to understand how those solutions affect sustainability, equity, and resilience as well. To accomplish this, and Matthew, this is a prompt that you gave us, what do we need to accomplish this? Part of it is just more data, more sources throughout the supply chain, and making sure that is interoperable with other food system data so that it can be brought to bear universally. And then more partners. Our network is a very strong network, but we don't cover all areas. And so partners in data with data science expertise, database architecture expertise. We do have some artificial intelligence folks in our network, but there's plenty of scope for more and different types of AI folks to work with us. And all of that would be very helpful in terms of helping Recipes accomplish its goals with respect to the data frontier. All right.
Wow, what a great project. So exciting to see that kicking off. Let me ask you, Brian, how do you see these recipes, the technology, and really kind of this coalition of different actors coming together to kind of implement change in production processing and food systems in general? So once we have this data network, where do you think it's going to really have an impact?
Yeah, so part of the Recipes approach is through this idea of convergence, and as part of that, we'll have our these design studio activities throughout the years of the Recipes network, where we'll bring in stakeholders that may be impacted by the data that's being collected, whether they be from the production side, processing, community side, so that they can help us ideate how data can be used, what data needs to be collected, how it might be collected. And so there is a process in place through some of our individuals in the network who are focused on design and kind of processes to make sure that we are really integrating with stakeholders in a very open and transparent way.
Oh, great. Looking forward to seeing how this grows. So let's come back to more on recipes at the end. But for now, that was a great presentation, Brian. Thank you. And let's have our final guest today, Ned Spang. We're so excited to have you join us. Welcome, Ned. Dr. Spang is an associate professor of food science and technology at University of California, Davis. And you also, I think we may have mentioned, lead the measurement and characterization projects for the California Food Loss and Waste Collaborative, right? So,
correct.
Yeah, excited to hear more about that. Now, I know you're planning to lead us through a couple of specific cases today, but before you jump on that, I did want to ask you, because I know you also recently participated in leading a giant review on food loss and waste and kind of the measurement drivers solutions. So kind of this huge look at everything that's in action out there. That was a really great work and great job getting that out there. I know that lots of our colleagues were involved in that, but I want to know from you, from that process, because those are huge undertakings, what were some of the key insights and takeaways that you got from that have, kind of helped, that are helping guide your work now? And then we'll be excited to see your cases as well. So.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that was a large effort with a number of colleagues here at Davis and outside the university. We looked at over 200 different articles that had addressed the topic of food loss and waste. And we're trying to synthesize information to really create a baseline of what we know. And we did have some guidance on, what we need to advance the field, which I will actually talk about in my presentation towards the end. But there's certainly opportunity for improved data quality, as we've heard from both Brian and Dana. There's opportunity for synthesizing this data so that we can start to do a little bit more advanced thinking and decision making about how when we have surplus food or food that might be going to waste, picking the best decision of where that, the diversion pathway, from where it used to go to where it should go now with a new idea. And I do want to commend, Dana for the work, really representing food loss and from all those different perspectives, not just in terms of tons, but in terms of potential dollar saved, potential meals available for other people. All of those things are some of the key decision variables so that we can do better with the food that we have.
Great. Well, we'll look forward to your examples. Thank you.
Great. All right. Well, thanks for having me on this video. I'm really happy to chat with you guys. It's always a pleasure also to be with Brian and Dana. We work together on many of these items, and the food loss and waste community, it tends to be a pretty tight-knit community. And of course, we always invite others to join us, but it's a wonderful group to be a part of to work on this issue. So I want to talk a bit about how we think about food loss and waste, how we conceptualize it, how we measure it, and then walk you through a few case studies of research that I've worked on that are, how did we use data to create some new knowledge across different parts of the supply chain. So I'll share that towards the end of the presentation. But first of all, I just want to zoom out a little bit and just say that, measuring food loss and waste is not necessarily as straightforward as you think. Sometimes, different studies will measure different parts of food. And so we can think about the corn plant in relation to that. And this is something we thought about from our study where we reviewed a bunch of articles, and we thought about, well, what's always included in food loss and waste measurement? What is sometimes included and what's really never included when we think about the corn plant, for example? So in the top right corner where you see the boundary is solid green, that's generally always included. That would be the kernels of corn on a corn cob. That's really the food that we eat when we grow corn. Now, sometimes people might just be measuring tons of corn, but they're also measuring the husk or the cob, which really aren't edible, but are part of that measurement. So we really what we're trying to highlight here is that people need to be very transparent and precise in their language when they're talking about what they're in fact measuring. Now, these other two items that are sometimes included would be what we called other intended parts. So it could be a ear of corn that grows on the plant, but it's a little too small to be marketable. Now, perhaps that is edible still, but it's not something that would necessarily sell easily in the marketplace. Other folks, sometimes they might measure loss due to natural causes, just saying, well, that was some losses. Perhaps it could have been prevented, perhaps not. So it may or may not be thrown in the bin of food loss and waste. Generally, we do not include inedible parts, such as the stalk of the plant that might be used for other things, but not for eating. And then also, we grow corn not to be eaten sometimes. And so that would be other non-food uses. For example, if we're growing corn to generate ethanol. Now, the other dimension of food loss and waste we have to think about that's not just the amount is where is it going? Where is it currently going? Because there are significant different environmental impacts, social impacts of how that food waste is currently being treated. So if we want to think about how it should be treated, we sort of need to know what we're starting with. Is it currently being sent to feed animals? Is it currently being sent to landfill? And then we can think about what we should do to address that food waste in a better way. And we have some guidance on this. The Environmental Protection Agency has what's called the food loss and waste hierarchy, which generally has it's a list of preferences for what we should do with food loss and waste. And the first thing we should do is potentially reduce it. If we can't reduce it, maybe we can redirect it to feed hungry people. If we can't feed people, perhaps we can feed animals and still keep that food indirectly in the food system. The next layer would be industrial uses, which maybe we can extract some compounds from food waste streams that are valuable, and hence we're valorizing food waste before we dispose of it or recycle it. Another option there might be anaerobic digestion, which is a technology where microbes break down the organic material and produce biogas so that we get some energetic value out of the food loss and waste stream. Below that would be composting. So we're returning nutrients to the soil. There's still some positive benefit there. And really the last option with no real positive value and just a negative value, because ultimately the food breaks down into methane and a lot of that's released to the atmosphere, is landfill. Now, this particular EPA hierarchy has sort of been updated and integrated by the Champions 12.3 group that Dana mentioned before, where we have a little bit more specificity on those different layers of destinations. So I'm going to be using the term destinations here as this other key aspect of defining food loss and waste. Yes, we need to know how much there is and what we're dealing with, whether it's kernels or corn on the cob, but we really also need to know where it's going. So if we start to put some of this together, we have the food loss data, we have the destination. The other piece I want to mention that Dana also brought up was the driver. We need to understand why it was lost or wasted. And that's really going to help us with the top of the pyramid. If we know why it was lost or wasted, we can really think about prevention strategies. So whether that's weather-based or whether it's a lack of sufficient infrastructure to get it from point A to point B, whether there was a shift in market conditions, and we saw this in some of our work in on-farm losses, where there might be times where the price of the product dips in the marketplace such that the grower would not recover their investment of going out to even harvest the crop. So the cost of the harvest is greater than what they would get in the marketplace for selling that product. At the food loss and data point where we're trying to measure volume, we also want to know a lot more about that. So, okay, so we have a weight. What percent of the total amount of food that was at that site was there? So then we get to start to get a relative measurement or a percentage. Where is it in the food supply chain? Where is it geographically? What type of food is it? Is it edible or inedible at the point where it diverged from the food supply chain? And was it avoidable or unavoidable loss? All of these things help with our decision making and help us to think about where we want to direct financial and resource investments to either prevent or recover some value in the food loss and waste streams. So I'll walk you all through a few studies we've done here at Davis across the food supply chain. So the first one is we did some studies of on-farm losses. And this was an area where there was really not a lot of data available, because if you think about it, food, once it's in the market or once it's in the food supply chain, you have different points of the system where you're taking measurements. So you might be taking measurements at the packing house, taking measurements at the storage site, measurements at wholesale, retail, etc. But if you're not harvesting off the farm, you're not really measuring it at all. It's sort of out of sight, out of mind. So we work with growers to get some estimates of what those losses might be. And then we wanted to think about, well, how does that affect the environmental impact? If we left half the tomatoes in the field, then that means all the fertilizer that was used is really being used to only produce half the amount of tomatoes. So that creates a greater environmental impact if we're not harvesting all the material. So the graph on the right is showing that difference. When you look at the smaller box that says in-field losses, you see something like fresh tomatoes, or about 30% were left in the field. Well, that leads to a higher greenhouse gas emissions or global warming potential as we measure it in life cycle assessment. it leads to a higher amount of greenhouse gases per tomato that actually leaves the field. So what we're comparing here is the greenhouse gases per tomato, whether it's full harvest or we're including the losses in the field. The other piece we wanted to think about, which was sort of interesting, was that if the goal might not necessarily be to get everything out of the field, because if there is a tomato that might have a scar on it, and a consumer might not want to buy that, if we push that down the food supply chain and no one buys it and no one eats it, it's accruing a lot more resource investment through refrigeration, transportation, etc. So we want to think carefully, and actually for some fruit that might be marginal or someone might not buy, perhaps leaving it in the field where it goes back to the soil might be the better option from an environmental perspective. So this is just to say that it is a rather complex space. It's not always an easy solution. Okay, let's get everything off the farm. We really need to think about what the risk is that food goes into the food supply chain and is still not eaten. And if it's not eaten, what happens at that point? Does it get thrown in a landfill? Then we have even more of a problem. In the middle of the food supply chain, there are losses at food processing plants. So for example, if you go to a juicing operation, you have all these nice fruits and vegetables coming in the front door, you're pressing out the juice, and you're left with a lot of the fiber, which still has a lot of nutrition in it. And so we actually worked with a juicing company that came to UC Davis and said, you guys have a lot of food science students. What can we do with this material that we're currently sending out the back door? And so we challenged our students. We said, all right, I want you guys to work with this juicing company, measure the waste streams that are currently available. Let's categorize them. What kind of waste pomace is left over from pressing kale and carrots and cucumbers, etc. Let's develop new food products, and they have to be tasty. Otherwise, no one's going to buy them. So it doesn't do much good if you develop some what's called an upcycled food product, but it doesn't taste very good. And finally, we wanted to see if we could hit lower price points so that it could be competitive in the marketplace. So this is just an example of other types of metrics you'd want to think about if you're pursuing this upcycled route to develop new food products. And this was a lot of fun. The students developed, I think, at least over 15 recipes, trying different mixes of the waste streams and developing really interesting ideas. And eventually they entered their final product in a business competition here at UC Davis and won a $5,000 prize. So it was a great opportunity to be creative, to use their food science skills, and eventually develop a business model around this process. Finally, at the end of the food supply chain, I mentioned a technology earlier called anaerobic digestion. This is the process that uses microbes to create biogas as it breaks down the organic material, and you're also left with a nutrient-rich digestate that can be used as a soil amendment. So here in California, we're currently under a legislation called Senate Bill 1383 that's asking us to divert 75% of our organic material from landfill towards composting or anaerobic digestion. We don't currently have the infrastructure in the state to manage this massive diversion. So we want to do some thinking here at UC Davis about what that infrastructure might look like. And one of those questions is, what is the scale of the infrastructure? Do we have a few large anaerobic digesters, or do we have many small ones? And the major impact of that decision is that you're going to have a lot more hauling requirements or a lot more trucks on the road moving this material around if you have centralized facilities. So we took data from Los Angeles County. We carved out the data in what we called food waste sheds to get an understanding of where the food waste was being generated, and then did cluster modeling to identify what the landscape would look like at various scales of anaerobic digesters. So this middle picture is what the clusters would look like if we had 15 anaerobic digesters for all of Los Angeles County. And the picture on the right is if we broke the landscape into many, many more pieces because we had much smaller systems, for example, the size of a shipping container or two. Now, the likely optimal answer is somewhere in between, where the large systems would make sense in some locations, and in some locations, the smaller system would make sense. But what we're exploring here is this question of scale that has been brought up before. There we go. So Courtney asked me before, what were some of the takeaways from our large effort to synthesize what we learned from the literature. We identified some ongoing challenges in that effort, as I talked about before, inconsistent concepts or definitions. So whether someone said corn, but wasn't specific about whether it was corn kernels or corn on the cob. This idea that there's multiple data gaps, and that can be by region. So some regions have better data than others. We have better data on some food types than others. And we also have better data on different stages of the food supply chain. So we need a more complete and even coverage of data collection across all those different dimensions to have a better understanding of these systems. And then looking forward, effective solutions are going to require addressing some of those larger drivers of food loss and waste, because that really helps us get to those prevention solutions. We really need an interdisciplinary and systems-based perspective. I think my work on the on-farm losses highlighted that a little bit, where if we kind of zoomed out from the system, getting all of the produce off the farm might not be the goal. If it eventually gets wasted downstream, it can have actually a greater environmental impact than leaving it in the field. So we have to think about some of those little more challenging cause and effects across a broader system. I think Dana mentioned this as well. It's a portfolio approach. There's no silver bullet here. The solutions really need to match the location, the food supply chain, the food type, et cetera. So it's going to take a lot of ideas, a lot of stakeholders, and of course, the investment that we discussed as well. I also think there's a lot of room for robust evaluation. A lot of people have solutions that they're proposing for food loss and waste. We don't have a lot of measurement on really what works and what doesn't work. From an academic perspective, really doing evidence-based evaluation. So any contributions there will be extremely helpful moving forward. There's a lot of opportunity to leverage emerging technology. As Brian said, the effort to build out this ontology for interoperability will allow us to leverage a lot more computational power on this issue. So whether that's machine learning, artificial intelligence, there's a lot of room there, but we just have to get our data organized to leverage those tools. And then finally, I think there's a lot of room for industry, academia partnerships to put some of these pieces together, as well as working with NGOs like ReFed that have done such fantastic work to synthesize knowledge in the field. And with that, I'll suggest we move over to the group discussion.
Well, you're not. We're not quite ready for that group discussion yet, Ned. You're in the hot seat for one more minute.
Let me
actually,
have it.
And I'm only supposed to have one question for you, but I've got a couple. So, first of all, you showed the corn, and I was sitting there looking at the corn cob and the husk in particular, and I'm wondering, why don't I have any clothes made from corn husks? What? It seems like a perfectly good cellulose fiber to make clothes from. And then I started wondering, well, if that's the case, maybe somebody's picking up those corn husks and making clothes out of them. But would that would then leave the food loss and waste accounting, and it would enter into the textiles something, right? So how would you account for something like that? How do you keep track of stuff like that?
The key is in the definition itself of food loss and waste, that it's food that's intended for human consumption. So you start with whether that food is produced for human consumption, and if it doesn't make it to human consumption, it is then in the bin of food loss and waste. So the corn husk is not being grown, it's not intended for human consumption. However, you could, under the definition of the Upcycled Food Association, since it's a byproduct of food, you could incorporate that into a new product. And there are a lot of interesting solutions out there for using some byproducts from the food system and getting additional revenue streams from the cellulose or whatever additional materials are part of that food item. And I think that's where we're seeing a lot of creativity. Certainly there's some, we've been doing some of these things for a long time. The corn husk in particular has been used to make tamales for a very long time. So, a lot of this idea of upcycling and being creative with what we already have is following a model that we've done for centuries. Yet we have new tools, we have new technologies to transform that material and new potential markets to tap into to sell those materials.
Okay. And my second question for you is about your anaerobic digesters. Did you consider? I've long wanted in my house for my garbage disposal to be diverted to my compost pile, it doesn't make sense that that's not the case. That in a solar powered garbage disposal could also essentially grind things up for a personal anaerobic digester. Did you take your analysis down to that level of what it would look like if we had household anaerobic digesters for producing energy from waste?
We haven't gotten down to that level. And I think, there's some balance here between this disaggregated network to reduce hauling and that kind of thing, but also leveraging a little bit of economies of scale. So the digester and the combined heat and power unit that actually convert that biogas to electricity, there's some benefits to building that around a cluster. And you might have a model for a multifamily home or something like that would make a bit more sense before we go all the way into the home and having everyone have their individual AD unit. But I think there's room for innovation everywhere. I think there are some models out there I've seen of kind of a home biodigester kit. I've seen home composting, of course, has been around for a long time, but there's even some that allow people to do it in apartments. They use electricity to kind of help advance that process a little bit, so it doesn't smell, it goes a little faster. But there's definitely models out there, and people are exploring that household model.
Great. Okay, now we can do the group discussion.
Great.
Why don't we bring everybody back?
I was just so looking forward to talking with my colleagues here.
Yeah, no, great. No, we're going to do it right now. I won't get between you and them anymore.
Okay, well, I have one question for you, which is kind of specific, but kind of broad all at the same time. And I was noticing at the very beginning when Dana was going through kind of the different categories of waste, one of the waste of where food goes went to animal feed. And so that's food that goes to animal feed. But when Ned was talking about characterization, you're saying the food is intended for animal feed might not be considered food that's wasted at all. And then, and then that kind of even leaps into, how do we build an ontology to differentiate these specific pieces? And so just looking at the animal feed example, I would like all three of you to talk about, how do you really think about, the corn that's grown for cattle feed and, it could be human feed, but it's not going to be human feed, and how you kind of factor that into this measurement process. And maybe starting with Dana, since you have
Yeah. So, there's a few levels of answers to that question. I would say the first level is there has been at times a debate as to whether just simply eating meat and the conversion of feed to actual food that occurs when you eat meat, 8-to-1 or whatever for beef, is actually a loss in itself. So I would say that was a debate that happened early on. I think generally speaking, that's been kind of separated from the question of how much food is going to waste at this point. So we don't look at the fact that we grow corn and feed it to animals as a waste loss situation right now. At least, we at ReFed don't. And I would say the international community is not looking at that in that way. There is an international goal that is a sustainable development goal of the UN that a lot of countries have signed on to, the US has signed on to, businesses have signed on to, and there is and that is to cut food loss and waste in half by 2030. The interpretation of that goal says that, because what we're talking about is not just feeding animals, what we're talking about is having food go through the supply chain and then not have a use for it, and then have that when instead of sending it to a landfill, then feeding it to animals, right? So it's a little bit different than just growing corn and feeding it to animals. So as part of this goal, if you have food going through the chain and it's surplus, which is why we call it surplus, it's not waste yet, but what do we do with it? When that gets fed to animals that are livestock and will be fed, part of the human food supply chain, that actually in the international definition that's been kind of commonly accepted, that does not count towards the official waste goals. So that actually counts as a solution. If it goes into pet food, that is not going into the human supply chain, and that actually counts as a waste destination. So it does get really complicated.
Yeah, there's lots of definitions out there, but I think I'm trained as an economist, and one way I always think about this is suppose society wanted a particular suite of outputs, food, your corn, your shirt material, etc. How would we most efficiently provide for all those outputs? We probably wouldn't grow corn to be wasted and then be shipped through a circuitous route to make animal feed, right? We would probably just grow animal feed directly and efficiently. So, but we need to have a kind of a comprehensive database in order to be able to undertake those types of analyses to really understand what is the most efficient means. And then we can have those other discussions of, are those suite of outputs exactly what is best for society going forward? Does there need to be a shift in diet? Does there need to be a shift in the way items are processed? Do we need to have clothes that last longer and use fewer resources? And then we can have those two separate conversations. But that's kind of the way I approach that. But all of that requires a kind of a strong data backbone in order to be able to attack those issues.
Yeah, I would just add that this is a great illustration of how it's not as straightforward as it seems at first pass. And the more you dig into this topic, you really have to do some thinking, and you have to work with the community working on this topic to really make choices about what you're defining, goes in the, under the definition of food loss and waste, and what we're not going to include in there at this moment. So for me, it does help to have that sort of baseline. Was it grown or was it produced? Was it intended for human consumption? That's what we're starting with. Then we even have a lot more definitions to work on after that.
Brian, I'm curious, since you just opened up the economist can of worms. I'm curious about your take on whether current agricultural subsidies may be contributing to some of the food waste issues that we have, and the degree to which the Recipes Project may be able to guide more appropriate policy interventions at that level.
Yeah, I think when we think about agricultural subsidies, there's work that goes on in terms of subsidies to implement new technologies. And so we think of a lot of funding that does go on the technology side, which does improve efficiency writ large across the agricultural sector. So being able to get more calories and nutrients out of the same square acre or square mile of land. But then there are also items that change the profile of foods that farmers want to produce, which could lead to waste if they're not well aligned with the nutritional needs of the country. And so I think there are two sides to subsidies in terms of, we think of spending that comes out of the federal government towards the agricultural sector. And both, I think, are ripe for analysis to understand how the global effect on sustainability and wasted food come to play.
Yeah, I was thinking in particular production subsidies to food producers.
Yeah,
or even crop insurance.
Sure, and I know crop insurance in particular, if we think about what are known as specialty crops, which are the food crops, which is always oddly named by USDA. But the foods we actually eat directly are called specialty crops. The ability to provide insurance is those markets aren't as well developed as they are for the commodity crops. And I think investments there could go a long way to dealing with some of those risks at the farm level that can lead to farm loss in directly edible items coming off farms as well.
And are those items that are lost in the field considered lost food, or are they considered earlier in the cycle?
Yeah, it depends who's measuring them. I know USDA's loss adjusted food availability data set, kind of the official data set. For some commodities, there are estimates of on-farm loss, and then for others, like for dairy and seafood, currently assume zero loss going from the farm level to retail. And these are known deficits in some of the data sets maintained by USDA, and a lot of our data systems rely on those. And so there's been efforts underway to improve those data sets to get loss factors at those levels.
So one quick question, because I think, unfortunately, we're about out of time. So we've been looking at some of the huge gaps and deficits. I want to know from each of you, who does it the best? Where are we getting the best data that we can actually rely on?
You're looking at them, these two.
Well,
I just mean, like, are there
the
specific
most,
sectors or
ReFed has
parts of the
thought
system?
most holistically about bringing together all the possible data sets and assembling them in a usable fashion. And then I think it's going to be on Ned and myself and other colleagues, both in industry and in academia, to try to just develop more data sources that can be used interoperably to keep feeding that engine with better and better data.
Yeah, I would agree with Brian there. I mean, I think ReFed has done by far the best job of synthesizing the data that's out there. And really that data quality piece that Dana mentioned is incredibly important. It helps guide where we need to, where their synthesis is saying, look, this is our best guess, but we need more, studies in this area. But for academics, when we're doing I said that the losses really depend on location and crop type and all that kind of thing. So we really need to do our work to go in and do some of those studies and make sure that when I do a study and someone else in North Carolina does a study, that our methods are close enough so that they can be kind of packaged together and put up into these larger data aggregation systems like Dana has worked on. So that's part of the reason why these definitions and measurement approaches being standardized is so incredibly important.
But a quick shout out to RAP in the UK, because we're all trying to catch up to the quality of data that they have in the UK.
It's true.
And I would just add, academic information is really, really useful. And like the actual data, like having businesses actually track what they're doing, their data, and understand it for themselves, and then ideally be willing to sort of pool it and share it in a way that can be benchmarked is really key as well. So it's a mix.
And then, of course, you have that data sharing public-private challenge to overcome in that process as well.
So since we just heard that you've got the best engine in visualization, which it seems like you've got some great stuff going there, Dana, I'll give you the opportunity to say, what do you need? What do you need from the academics right now, like as soon as possible? And what do you need from corporations to take it to the next level, to cut food waste in half by 2030? What besides compliance? What's your ask?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so excited about the recipes project, and we've had, a lot of initial conversations. And to me, it's like, oh my God, there's this network of researchers who are looking for projects, and boy, do we have ideas about where research, could be useful. So I think that's a great unlock. And so, I would love to see those researchers get more funding so that there's like a limitless possibility. But also, a lot of times those researchers, including these two and others, are relying on participation by the farmers, by the food companies, allowing them to go sit in the back of their grocery store and have their grad students, checking boxes and watching things and taking pictures. And so I think we need participation, right, by all. And beyond that, my ideal would be to have a lot of the standard systems that are out there incorporating food loss and waste, so that the point of sale systems at restaurants that are also managing the inventory, could we find ways to actually add calculations and metrics in there that sort of automate this stuff? Could we do that in the ERP systems that grocery chains are using? I think that to me is the holy grail, is like, let's build this in, just like you get financial dashboards. Let's have a dashboard on this that can be useful.
Terrific.
Awesome.
Fully agree, Dana.
All right. Well, I hate to say it, but we are at the top of the hour. We're past the top of the hour. So we've got to wrap up our conversation. It's been a great conversation. To our virtual audience, and Matthew and I want to just thank Ned, Dana, and Brian for joining us today. We're very much looking forward to seeing how all of these projects progress. So thank you so much.
Yep.
Thank you for having us.
Before we close, just want to say you can catch next month's episode on the third Thursday, same time, same place. And we will see you there. If you don't want to miss it, just hit subscribe down below.
And give us a like. Thanks. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.